then in 2001, we had the attack on the World Trade Center. And suddenly you saw a mobilization of America. Again, a remobilization. And what happened? Immediately they passed the Patriot Act, which got rid of our constitutional rights to jury trial, to habeas corpus, to be free from intrusion and eavesdropping by government, to be able to have the Fifth Amendment, which is to be freedom from torture. And all of a sudden, America, you had Dick Cheney, and I remember the day that he gave this speech, going on morning television, one station after the other, and saying to Americans, we are in a long war now. We are in a war against terrorism. And I remember thinking at the time, terrorism is not an ideology. Terrorism is not a people. Terrorism is not a nation. It's a tactic. And if you declare war on terrorism, that's a war that will never end, because it's always going to be there as long as you have poor people and people who are discontented, people whose lives are being trampled. That's going to be their tactic. And by declaring a war on terrorism, it occurred to me at that time, this is very dangerous, because this is a war over which they will have no ending. And the X-ray machines went up at the airports, and we got patted down, and our rights began becoming constricted. And then in 2009, this is 8 years later, President Obama signed the Global Health Security Agenda. That's something that all of you should look up, because it was a document, and it was a law that nobody in our country heard about at that time. It changed the entire way the American government acted. What that law did was it declared war on microbes globally. And it said, we are going to organize all of the American institutions, the government institutions, the agencies of government, and all of the institutions of civil society, including the media, the social media, the press, the medical industry, particularly the banking system, the digital system. All of these institutions are going to be directed to do one thing, which is to combat global micro pandemics. And none of us knew this at the time. This was passed in 2009, and that it would have organized at the biosecurity agenda would now be the spear tip of American foreign policy. And directives were sent out to the State Department and to all of the Pentagon, all the other institutions of government, saying that the centerpiece of American foreign policy would now be biosecurity. And I want you to go read that. It's very short, but it says, we're going to start monitoring microbes around the world. We're gonna fight off zootropic threats. We're going to increase immunization. We're going to develop a police force, a security force to ensure the safety of the public. And we're going to build the international institutions that can mount and control a global and orchestrate a global threat on pandemic microbes. And when I read that, I thought to myself, of course, when communism went down, you need an enemy to unify, to justify security measures, to justify surveillance, to justify the curtailment of civil rights, to make people scared, to tell people that they have to give up their rights in order to get security. And when communism fell apart, they needed another enemy to unite us and to make us compliant. And at first it was terrorism, which fit a lot of great models, because communists let us down. They gave up. And we know that terrorists are never going to give up. But what is the even better threat to scare people with? Microbes. Why? There's 2 trillion of them, and they're constantly mutating. And every day it can be a new threat. And 3 months after Obama signed that bill, that law, Bill Gates went to the UN and announced a decade of vaccines. This was the beginning of 2010, January of 2010. His decade ended January of 2020. It was supposed to be complete. The decade of vaccines would end in 2020. He launched it in 2010. He gave an initial investment of $10 billion, which gave him control over PATH, over Gavi, and over the WHO. The WHO's annual budget is $5.6 billion. Gates gives, through various vectors, $1 billion a year. He's by far the largest donor, much larger even than the United States. And his money goes to discretionary funding. So most of that the 4.6 that the UN or that the WHO has, it's committed to programs already. And it doesn't really give people power to do things they want to do, to hire their brother-in-law, to send their cousin to New York to eat hors d'oeuvres, or to wield power. But Gates's money was discretionary money. It came in and it gave him control over that agency. And suddenly you have a guy who is the face of digitalized planet, who is now who is addicted to monopoly control, who is now dictating global health policies. Well, if you really want control over human life, then the best place to be is in control of health policies, because now you can tell people not only what they ought to be buying, but you can tell them when to stay in their house, how close they can come to their girlfriend, what medicines they can and they cannot take, and what medicines they have to take. You can dictate every aspect of human life. Oh, if you're a guy who's addicted to power and monopoly, there's no better place to be. And it was at the same time the US was telling all of its agencies and all of the big corporations, the banks, the digital corporations, everything, that we are now going to make this biosecurity agenda the spear tip of American influence across the globe. And so that's in 2010. And then you see over the next 10 years, all of these efforts that we all now know about of pandemic response and pandemic security, and all of the different agencies who are now changing their posture so that by the end of the decade of vaccines, everybody will have the capacity and the authority to address the biosecurity problem within their own nation, and the global institutions that will be controlling and orchestrating that effort will be prepared to do so. And so then in 2019, right at the anniversary of the decade of vaccines, the WHO, under Gates' control, declares that vaccine hesitancy is the largest global threat to population health. And all of the newspapers and the social media dutifully and slavishly take up that chant. Nobody questions, how is that? How does that work? Do we know that the vaccines are actually having better health outcomes? Do we know that vaccinated people are healthier than unvaccinated people? Nobody asked any of those difficult questions. Everybody just said the WHO says that vaccine hesitancy is now the greatest threat to global health. And we all need to address it. And almost as a trigger, you had a measles outbreak in Disneyland, and in 50 states, 101 separate bills tried in my country, impose mandates to get rid of religious exemptions, philosophical exemptions, and medical exemptions, and force every child to vaccinate. Whoa. And the increase, we now have 72 mandated vaccine doses to our children. There's 270 in the pipeline, new ones. And it's all increasing. And so you had this, this outpouring, not only in the United States, but 120 nations around the world began passing vaccine mandates, all right on time, 2019. And then by the end of that year, of that big battleground, when a lot of us began mobilizing and saying, what's happening? Why is it all happening at once? Why in Missouri and California and New York do they all have the same bill, all trying to pass it at the same time? And are all the nations around the world doing the same thing, all on time, on cue? And at the end of that 1 year, when the battle was announced, you had COVID appear. What the governments will try to tell you is that, see, this shows that government is humane, that it's kind, that it's putting human health in front of business, in front of money, people making mere money. And you can trust the government because it's acting in this responsible, humane way. But we always need to ask ourselves, cui bono? Who is benefiting? Who is getting rich on this? We know it's the digital companies. It's Amazon. It's BlackRock. It's Goldman Sachs. It's all the big international bankers who are digitalizing our currency so nobody can escape their watch. So that every transaction, even if you buy a pack of cigarettes or a pack of gum, will be recorded, it will be taxed, it will pay a transit fee to these companies and to the government who are installing. These are the same companies, Facebook and Verizon and AT&T, who are installing this surveillance architecture, which now has the capacity to watch every. Bill Gates boasted that his satellite systems alone will be able to watch every square foot of the planet 24 hours a day. There will be no place to escape from them. And if you look at the people, if you say to yourself, who are the people who are censoring our debate? All of those people are the people who are making money on the lockdown. Facebook, they have permanently bankrupted half the businesses in America. These are all small businesses. And guess who's replacing them? Amazon. So what's happening now is a giant shift in wealth from the middle class in America, which is being obliterated and disempowered. And our constitutional rights are being robbed. And that wealth is being shifted to this very rich group of robber barons from Silicon Valley and from the banking industry and from the pharmaceutical industry and the medical cartel. And, we need to, I go through this history for you, one, because somebody mentioned my uncle, but also it's really important for us to understand who we are fighting here and what the stakes are, not only for the people in this room, but for all of humanity. And most of you people are woken up. You see what's happening. Your minds are open. You're thinking critically. You're questioning authority. And, my father told me when I was a little boy, people in power lie. We all need to remember that. And for my whole life, if I hear somebody, no matter whether I like them or not, who is wielding power, I always say, well, I trust you, but I need to verify that. I need to ask the question. And unfortunately, most of the people, including people who are traditional liberals, people who believe in human freedoms, people who when I was growing up until 2 years ago, liberals across the planet considered freedom of speech sacred. Yes. And now it's gone. And, we have a First Amendment in our country that protects freedom of speech. And we were the first nation to have that. And the founders of my country did not pass the First Amendment to protect speech when it is convenient, when it doesn't offend anybody. The First Amendment is there to protect speech when it's obnoxious, when it's dangerous, and when it is inconvenient, when people don't want to hear it. That's why we have rights. We have religious rights, not when everybody likes the same religion, but when you don't like that religion. They have the right anyway. We have the right to assembly, not when we like your protest, or when we don't, when the government doesn't like your protest. That's why we have it. When they say the protest is dangerous because there's a pandemic. That's what the First Amendment is for. It's not there to protect protests that everybody agrees with. It's there to protect the protests that nobody agrees with. The minority. They're trying to break us up. They're trying to atomize us. They're trying to fragment us. They're trying to keep us from our humanity, from connecting with each other, so that we become commoditized. We become, dehumanized. And you see the look in people's eyes when they're wearing the mask. They don't recognize your humanity anymore. They don't recognize their solidarity, their brotherhood, their sisterhood with you. You become foreign to them. You become something that they don't want to conspire with, that they don't want to have a relationship with. And those relationships are the only things that are going to save humanity right now. And, that's why it's important for all of us from the different languages, the different cultures, and the different countries come together now. I invite you all to be part of what we're doing in the United States, and we're going to make every effort through CENTA and through every energy that we have to support all the things that you're trying to do in Europe, and to increase the solidarity in our movement, to increase the communications, and to be a force of love, reconciliation, and of freedom. So thank you all very, very much.